start off, can you tell me a bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Irvin Brohammer. I'm a retired Sergeant First Class, United States Army. I served from October of 1972 through October of 1992. I served as a Pershing missile crewman. Pershing missile was the largest nuclear capable missile that the Army had. It no longer has it. It was reduced or done away with by the INF Treaty back in the late 80s. I served the majority of my time. I was in a very unique type of environment, a very unique unit in the United States Army. I actually served overseas 18 and a half years in Germany.
Can you tell me why you initially wanted to join the military?
Back in 1972, the Vietnam War was still going strong. I graduated from high school, went to a year of college. College wasn't for me. The environment wasn't for me. I was also a farm boy living on a farm, but a hired hand type farm. It wasn't my dad's farm or anything like that. And I just did not want to be a farmer for the rest of my life. I didn't want to stay in that type of environment. So I talked to the Army recruiter. I had two, shall we say, restrictions on my service. I didn't want to go to Vietnam, and I wanted to work with missiles or rockets or Army or something like that. This was back when space was still, shall we say, new, going to space and things like that. Everybody wanted to be an astronaut. And so I said I wanted to work with missiles or rockets, and Pershing missile was the way I went. So.
Can you tell me a bit about what you did in the military, where you deployed?
My first assignment after basic and advanced training was at a unit, a very unique unit. Back after World War II, the German government could not own or possess nuclear weapons. However, NATO, back in those days, decided that we needed to deploy the Pershing missile in Europe. They wanted to have 3 units, 108 total missiles from the United States Army, plus they wanted the German government to have some of the missiles, but they couldn't own the nuclear warheads. So basically what it was is the Germans purchased the missile system. The Americans kept control of the warheads. I spent 6 years there, co-located with the German Air Force, basically guard duty. But that got boring after a while, guard duty did. So I went into the operations side of the house, where we were the guys that decoded the classified messages. We were the guys that said, push the button, shoot the missile. After my 6 years there, I spent a year at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. But I wasn't really at Fort Sill. I spent, of that year, 6 months downrange at Fort Bliss, McGregor Range, shooting missiles. I didn't shoot them, I supported the crews. Plus, I spent another 6 months at Fort Smith, Arkansas. This was when the Cuban boat lift happened, and all the people from Cuba were released, or Castro sent them over, or however you want to say it. And they were housed and split up and I don't want to say deployed, but they were sent away to their homes. And my year then was not at Fort Sill. It was assigned to Fort Sill, but not there. I then went back to Europe and spent 11 years in Neu-Ulm, Germany as an operations sergeant at a U.S. Pershing missile site until the Pershing missiles went away in the late 80s, early 90s. I then spent my final year in Idar-Oberstein, Germany, working with the multiple launch rocket system, again in the operations side. Retired and then came back to the States.
Yeah. What do you remember about adapting to military life?
It was completely different. Obviously, I was a farm boy, used to being out on the farm. You work hard, but you're not doing anything, if you will. You're farming, which is a big deal, don't get me wrong. But then you went into the military, completely different lifestyle. The regiment, the idea, you had the rules, the regulations. Now, true, on a farm, you have time to get up in the morning. Every morning you had to get up at the same time to milk the cows. That's not the point. The point is that this was a very strict regimented life, which I was not used to. So that was a big change. And then living with people. I had my own room growing up in my house. Here I had to live with 30, 40 other guys in the barracks. So big difference there.
Yeah. What skills or lessons did you learn from your service?
Because of the way we worked, I was in a leadership position most of the time, so I learned leadership skills. Unfortunately, there isn't much calling in the civilian world for a nuclear weapons specialist. I mean, there just isn't. So I could take some of the skills I learned in other parts of the job and put them into the civilian life, the organization, the attention to detail, you know, the idea that I would be away from my family, things like that. I learned those skills, or I practiced those skills. But again, it wasn't like I was a cook in the military. I could be a cook as a civilian. It just didn't work that way.
Yeah. What did you learn about yourself after serving?
You learn in the service. You learn a lot. I learned that I could do things. I could stretch myself. I could work hard and achieve a goal. I didn't know a lot about the world. Growing up in a farm in Harvard, Illinois, you don't see much of the world, especially back in 1972. We didn't have 500 channels on the television, all the social media, things like that we didn't have. So I wasn't exposed to the world. And especially, I lived for almost 19 years, 18 and a half years in Germany in a completely different environment. So I had to adapt to a completely different people. And people are different around the world. I'm sure if you travel, you'll see that. More so if you're not a tourist. By that I mean if you go there to live in the economy or live with the people. I can understand, for example, a foreign exchange student that comes to visit us or we go over there, you're immersed in a different culture. So I had all of that I had to look at when I went overseas.
Yeah. What are some life lessons you learned from your service?
One of the big things, you learn to plan. You don't look at tomorrow. You don't have that instant, you're not aware of the instant gratification, or not aware, but you're not worried about instant gratification. I learned to put money aside, my 401ks and retirement funds, that as a 20-year-old guy, 21, 22-year-old guy, nowadays, you don't think about that. You want to spend the money on your jumping off cliffs and having fun. Bungee cord, I don't know they jump bungee cord anymore? I don't know. But you learn all of that. That's the stuff that the youth today looks at, that instant gratification. I looked at the long term. What am I going to do when I get out of the military? What am I going to do, for my family next week, 2 months from now, things like that. So I learned those kind of skills. Organization, when I got out of the service, I started a couple trucking companies, where I wasn't just a driver of the company, I was the dispatcher, I was the owner. And I had to worry about people there, but I didn't worry about them because I had learned how to take care of people in the military.
Yeah. What was the best and worst part of your service?
Well, the best part obviously was travel. I've been to 18 different countries, a couple continents. So I traveled quite a bit, met my wife, had kids, so that was a good part. I met all kinds of people. In the military, you meet from the richest person to the poorest person, regardless of color, creed, sex, religion. You meet all of these people and you get exposed to them, so that was good. On the flip side, you got to deal with people, and there was a couple times when you have to put people's lives on the line. I mean, literally, you had to say, that guy could be dead tomorrow because of what I did today. So is it a worse thing? Perhaps, but it was something that you looked at.
How did you stay in touch with family and friends?
Back then, in the late 70s, 80s, 90s, we didn't have toward the end, we had the internet that was starting to come. But other than letters, the occasional phone call to the States, phone call back home, that was what you did, letters and the occasional phone call, all right? But you also miss out on a lot of things because you're not there. So there's a lot of apologies. I'm sorry I missed your birthday. I'm sorry I'm late for your anniversary, something like that. But it was something you accepted as part of being in the military.
How meaningful was it to receive something from a family and friend?
Very much. I had the opportunity in the early or late, either the early 80s or the late 70s to take part of one of the first satellite, shall we say, transmissions, where they set up a station such as this where my family was, and they were able to, over a satellite, communicate with me. As it was a Christmas present from the United States Army. So that was very meaningful to do that. The care packages, we didn't get what, back when what I called a care package was a box, with food and clothing and stuff like that you sent to the refugees or to the people in the Eastern Bloc countries. I didn't get care packages, but it was always great to open up a box from home and get stale cookies and, things like that, knickknacks that you really didn't want. Mom sent you some shaving cream, but you could go down to the PX to buy the shaving cream. You didn't, but it was great.
Yeah. Did you meet any lifelong friends?
I have met people that I'm still friends with for over 40 years. Matter of fact, I just got a phone call from one when I was waiting here from a guy that I've known. I met him in 1981. So I've met them. Purging was kind of unique in the military. I equate it to being on a submarine in the Navy. Everybody in the Navy is a sailor, but there's only so many submarines operator, people that work on submarines. With Pershing Missile was the same thing. We were all soldiers in the United States Army, but there was only 3 units. There was only 4,000 people. There was only 108 missiles. So you were very unique people, a very unique group of people. So there's people that like I said, for the last 40 years. I've also met people that I also know and still contact people that I know, German civilians from overseas that I'm still in contact with. And that was almost 40 years ago.
Wow. Was there anything you took for granted about civilian life?
Yes and no. I suppose I took for granted that, you could do what you wanted as a civilian, and you can't. There's still restrictions, in the military you have, got to get up in the morning, keep your hair cut short, do this, go to PT, things like that. I figure civilians didn't have to do that. So I found out, not quickly, but yeah, they do. But one of the biggest things that the difference between military and being a civilian, as a civilian, you can say no and then take your consequences. In the military, you really can't say no unless it's an illegal order. And, there are consequences you still face. But, civilians can say no.
Yeah. Is there anything you wished civilians understood about the military?
Yes, there is. One of the big things about the military is patriotism. Everybody in the military believes in what they're doing. The job they're doing, regardless of what it is, be it a cook, a truck driver, or the guy that builds the missiles, I don't know, whatever you want to say. Civilians don't realize that's important. A lot of them don't. Civilians also don't realize that you're deployed away from your family. You want it. You say, okay, I will go. All right, it's a choice you make. But a lot of times, there's a lot of loneliness, a lot of times when you miss things. I missed the birth of my first child. I missed the birth of my second child. I missed the death of my parents. I was not there. I was deployed, okay? I accepted. It was one of those things. I mean, the death of a parent you don't accept, but it's one of those things that you might miss. And civilians don't understand that you just can't be at the beck and call, and you can't run. Mom's on her deathbed. You may not be able to get back in time to see mom die. That's a sad thing, but it's one of those things about being into the military.
How was it transitioning to civilian life?
It was difficult because of the time frame when I did it. In the early 90s, the economy was kind of similar to right now. It was slow, sluggish, whatever. When I got out, there weren't a lot of jobs. So, you had to take, if you will, what was available. Fortunately or unfortunately, whatever, at the time, the military was doing a transition back to civilian life. And they were trying to the military was also downsizing, so there was a lot of people getting out, so they started these programs. And one of the things they did was this transition. They had people from different organizations, civilian jobs, come over to overseas where we were and pitch their companies, pitch their products, if you will. Unfortunately, the majority of it was transportation. You know, a lot of the transportation companies want soldiers to sign up with them because they figure soldiers can work alone, they can be gone from their families, they will do the best job they can, all right? So it was kind of, shall we say, restrictive when I got out on what you could do. Plus my job, like I said, there wasn't much call for a nuclear weapons specialist in the civilian world, all right? And you never see, let's be honest, and I don't want to downplay this, but they don't hire sergeants to go work as supervisors in big factories. It's the captains, the lieutenants, the colonels, they get those jobs. You won't see a sergeant major stand up in front of one of the major television stations and tell us about the war in Afghanistan or whatever, unless he was the guy doing the fighting. But as an advisor, you don't see the sergeants do that, the officers do it.
Did you see any changes in what you value or appreciate after serving?
Well, I value my freedom. You know, it's one of those things maybe civilians take for granted is, you know, the freedom to do what they want. But I spent some time, like I said, I spent 20 years almost in Germany. I visited people that had been on the eastern part of Germany, and it was still under Russian and communist control. I knew people that lived there. I visited some of the Eastern Bloc countries on vacations or on business, and the freedom to act the way you want. A lot of people don't recognize that that's not a universal thing in the world. And the little things, for example, to this day, you cannot mow your lawn on Sundays in Germany. Here we take it for granted. Let's go mow our lawn. Can't do it. It's against the law. Okay, or, you know, it's not just a city ordinance, it's a law. You know, you can't do it. I take for granted things like, you know, I can play my music loud if I want. And there are restrictions, I know that here in the States, but they're more restricted in different parts of the country. I can remember going shopping in some of the Eastern blocks where I would see displays of food out, apples, oranges. And I'd say, I'd like these apples, and I'd pick them, give them to the guy to weigh, to pay for them. And he would take those really nice, pretty apples, oranges, set them aside, and give me the ones that he wants to sell me. Maybe the grade B's, not as pretty. And those are what I got. The idea that I go to the store and buy what I want when I want, it's not worldwide. We take it for granted as Americans.
Do you have any other stories or details about your service?
In what sense do you mean there? I mean, what I did or where I went? I was able to travel in Germany. When I was assigned to Europe, I was able to travel. Yeah. So I seen some of these places that tourists pay a lot of money to see. I've been up into Sweden, but I went to a small place in Sweden, not Stockholm, which is, I think, the capital. But I went to the smaller places. I went, and I've seen like I said, some of the Eastern Bloc countries. I went to Berlin when it was still a divided city, where you had to have special passes to travel. Okay, I've been to the Neuschwanstein, the Walt Disney Castle. I've been there. I went to France, Spain. I was on the Spanish Riviera for a vacation. I've been to Paris. I've been to London, all right? Climbed the Eiffel Tower. I've been seen Big Ben. So I got, as a small town country boy living here in Harvard, Illinois, I would never imagine that I seen some of these things, all right? But I got to see them. I met people, like I said, I've met people that I've known for 40 plus years and still keep in contact with. So I've seen these things that I appreciate, and I enjoyed the travel time.
Well, thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Yeah, good luck.